Well, guys, welcome back to another episode of Wreaking Havoc. I'm your host, Lucas Botkin, and we have a couple housekeeping things to go over. A few things that we did not talk about in the last episode because there was just so much to cover. What Wreaking Havoc is, what the goal of the podcast is, and the direction it's going. And the first thing I want to talk about is the background. As you all can see, we have muted the background. We have made it a much more blurred image. Each cut or each sort of subject that's in there is like 10 seconds long before each cut. So for those of you who suffer from epilepsy, you don't have to worry about going into some sort of medical condition problem while watching this show. And another thing that I saw a lot of people asking about is, how often are you doing this? Is this a one-time thing? Are you only doing these episodes when there's something in the news cycle to talk about, like some folks do? Or is this something that we can expect every week? So this is the plan with the Wreaking Havoc show. So we are in season 1. And the goal is we will be doing an episode every week on Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Central, until August 21st. Then I'm going to take a little bit of a hiatus, a little break, and there's a few reasons for this. So there's a lot of podcasters out there who do podcasts as their job. It's all they do. They bring guests on, they interview them, they produce great content that all of us can watch to learn from the guests that they bring on, and I do appreciate that. I think that's great. However, I don't necessarily want to be one of those people. I don't necessarily want to run a podcast every week because in doing so, you lose some operational relevance. And what I mean by that is, over the years, as I've kind of run around the country and talked to different people in different sectors of this particular field and other places, there's this sort of understanding in some military units that when an individual gets out of the military or they transition to a different unit or something, they usually have a shelf life of like 2 years before they don't have certain operational relevance as far as threats go, equipment, capabilities, SOPs within a certain organization. And when you actually go out and look at other fields outside the firearms industry, you find something very similar in the medical field and with pilots. So something that is very important to me is, as I'm a host and for lack of a better word, an influencer, a public figure who is presenting information and presenting ideas, something that is very important to me is that I can maintain relevance through doing work, doing all the different things that I am doing. And if I am running a show every week for the entire year, that takes me away from important work that I would like to be doing and I should be doing so that I can be relevant on a podcast like this. That's something that is very important to me. It's one reason that I shoot on my own time outside of filming content. In order to stay relevant as much as possible when it comes to presenting shooting content, I need to go and shoot matches. I'm shooting 2 or 3 this year. I need to take some classes from people. I usually fly instructors out and shoot with them. And I need to train on my own, just like I did last night after work, regular business hours. Went to the range, shot my sniper rifle that I'm getting ready for a sniper match with, shot a Glock pistol, was wearing around 80 pounds, running around on the range. My knees were not doing so well at the end of it. And the reason I do that is to maintain a level of relevance when it comes to producing content. So the strategy with this show is to produce a season, do 14 or so episodes, and then I'm going to go back to work doing all sorts of different things, traveling the country, talking to people, and then start up another season to talk about things that I've learned and things that I've done in that amount of time. And it will also give us a little bit of time to maybe upgrade the show, make some plans, get some guests to come out, do some things long term. And so that is just kind of the goal. But relevance is something that is very important to me, being a educational presenter, and something that I have found that is super important is taking the time to go and do other things apart from the regular job, apart from filming YouTube videos, apart from recording podcast episodes, so that I can give you all experiential examples, and I do have a couple fun ones for the episode today. Now, over the weekend, I posted a Q&A on my Instagram. I love to use my Instagram to run experiments on people. No, just kidding. That's not exactly what I do, but there's a little bit of that. But I like to run some polls and find out what you guys are thinking and what's going on. So I asked everyone, hey, what topics would you like to see covered on Wreaking Havoc? And probably 60%, 50% of the feedback I was getting was people asking questions like, hey, what is going on in the country? What should we expect or can we expect is going to happen with how crazy times are right now? Because this year is really weird and crazy. In fact, I was thinking about it some today while I was driving to work and then driving over here, comparing this year to, say, 2020, which was definitely a crazy year that we all lived through. This year is particularly interesting because there are more unknowns this year, I would argue, than years prior. There's just so much we don't understand or know about the election. We don't know about whether Trump's going to go to jail, whether he could potentially be elected to the presidency while sitting in jail. That would be very interesting. There's just so much we don't understand about the election, and so there are a lot of people that are very uncertain, and reasonably so. However, there is something that has happened recently that I think is extremely fascinating. So back in 2020, there was this group. It's called the Greater Idaho Movement. And basically what the concept is, if we can see over here on this map right here, is there are a number of constituents and citizens in the state of Oregon who don't feel like they are properly represented by the various people in the larger cities who essentially run the state and how things are, as it typically is. So there is this idea that counties, and on this map we can actually see, I believe this is 13 different counties, with a new one agreeing to this recently, that actually want to secede. They want to defect, you could even say, over to Idaho. And Idaho is totally down with it. So this is a very interesting thing that's come up, and it's sort of a form of Balkanization light, where you have people in a state who don't feel represented by the government, and I would say reasonably so with just the way things are, and they want to be able to move over to a state where they feel like they're properly represented. So over here we actually have, so you all can actually see some of the data and the voting. You will see a lot of green votes in support for the idea of these counties leaving and joining Idaho. The really interesting thing here is, while the landmass map that I just showed, and I'll flip back to it, shows a large part of Oregonians, if that's the right way to say it, who want to move over to Idaho, it's actually only 10% of the population. It's 200 miles west of Idaho, but it's only 10% of people, because most people happen to live in the urban areas, and so this just means a lot of the rural sort of territories would move over to Idaho. And this is a concept that I think we are going to see a lot more states and people talk about, is this idea of, moving over to another state where they can feel properly represented. And I think that is something that is an effective strategy. It could be an effective strategy for people to feel represented. And I like to propose the idea, and I've done this on various comment feeds and different shows, the idea of Balkanization in the first place for our country. And whenever I provide that sort of idea that, hey, the United States, at some point in our lifetime is probably going to Balkanize, and what that means is multiple states all break up, they essentially secede from the Union, or the Union dissolves, and then what we have is something like 10 to 12, maybe less countries that are in the landmass that is currently the United States of America. And when I present this idea, there's a lot of people that go, wow, you're really anti-America. You're anti-American citizens. We've got to keep the empire strong and all united. And I would actually argue there's a different perspective, which is we should want the best things for citizens in the United States of America, and it's possible that the best thing for citizens in the United States of America is actually separating from the federal government and running a country the way they see fit, separate from the government. That is originally how this country was founded back in 1775 and 1776, when we separated from Great Britain and formed the 13 colonies and then started America anew. So this is a strategy that has just happened. I think the last time a state ended up splitting off some counties was back in 1820 with Maine, and I believe it was Massachusetts. So it has been a very long time that this, long time coming that anyone has brought this up. But I do think this is an interesting scenario that has come up that most of us should be paying attention to. And when I say paying attention to it, what I mean is, there are a lot of people out there who focus on the election, the presidential election, because, it is wild and interesting, especially the last few elections. And while they're putting so much focus into the presidential election, there's things like this that are happening in Idaho and Oregon and other states all around the country that people should be paying attention to, because it is going to be an indicator for much larger stuff in the future. So I am fascinated by what is going on in Oregon and what is going on in Idaho. And in traveling the country, I have also noticed that different parts of America are just very different. If you visit Georgia, you go down to Atlanta, or you visit here in Tennessee, and then you go up to New York State, it just feels different. Yes, we all speak English. Yes, we all believe similar things about our country. But parts of the United States are absolutely and seem like a very different country. Now, I'm sure some of you guys in the chat are probably having a lovely conversation, a respectful conversation about differences and things that you have noticed in different states, such as comparing California to, say, Texas. And so many of you can probably see how having lots of different countries represented within our massive landmass of the United States of America could actually work and maybe is best for everyone in the future. And I believe we will see Balkanization in our lifetime. I don't know if it's going to be 4 years. I don't know if it's going to be 8 years, 50, who knows? But the fact of the matter is most empires only last a little over 200 years, and then they kind of break apart and form lots of new small empires or small countries. And I think we're going to see that, and this thing in Idaho might be the inciting incident for that. Now, another thing that happened that was very interesting for a number of reasons. Daniel Defense, as you guys know, has a checkered reputation. We went down and visited their facility recently, and we talked to the CEO and we talked to some of their staff about what's going on down there, because I've kind of assumed that they're this big, faceless, soulless company. I would argue they have been historically, and I'm not really sure if they're pro-2A. They've supported some kind of strange bills in the past, and they said some things where everyone's kind of like, wow, they kind of seem anti-2A. But we went down there, we met with them, we filmed a video, and one thing they told us about while we were down there, Rod Reason, their new CEO, is they have this sort of, it's not a new motto, but I think they kind of rephrased some things, and it's sort of their new slogan, and it is to honor God and defend freedom. And we kind of asked him, well, when are you guys going to tell people that? We think that's great. We support that 100%. And they said sometime in June or July, we will be presenting that to the masses in some sort of statement. And this statement right here from Daniel Defense, which went up last week in regards to a new lawsuit they are now embroiled in, they say it loud and clear in the second paragraph. And I'll give you guys a second to read that. But for those of you that are listening to the podcast who don't know what I'm talking about, it's essentially a fairly vanilla PR statement regarding a lawsuit that has been presented by Everytown USA and by individuals involved and victims, families of the victims of the Uvalde shooting, which is essentially bringing Daniel Defense and a couple other companies into a lawsuit regarding the shooting a couple years ago. This is a screenshot of an article that got posted, and something that's very interesting about this particular lawsuit is they are singling out Instagram for the content that they proliferate, specifically in Instagram having firearms guidelines, rules for marketing firearms, that this lawsuit is claiming that they are not, that they're not enforcing, while enforcing other rules that they have. So they're making some allegation of that. And they're also suing Activision, the producer of the Call of Duty series. And they're tying it to a very interesting post that Daniel Defense did a few years ago with Modern Warfare 2019, where they showed an M4, which is the rifle that is used, or similar looking rifle in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019, that has a RIS-2 or RIS-3 rail. And Daniel Defense posted that going, hey, one of our rifles is in Call of Duty. That's kind of cool, that's kind of interesting. And this lawsuit is trying to tie all this together and say, hey, Daniel Defense and Activision and Instagram are in this sort of grand cabal of marketing to youth and trying to get youth interested in these deadly firearms that are used by law enforcement, used by military, and that is what caused the shooting. And we need to bring these companies, to some form of responsibility. And I started doing research on this because this is something that I actually didn't know about. I wondered why so many gun companies for the last few years were quiet. They don't post certain kinds of content. They don't post people shooting that much. They don't post guys in kit. They're just kind of mellow in the kinds of content they produce. And in the last couple of years, and talking to people at SHOT Show, and then going down to Daniel Defense, and then recently talking on the phone to Paul Buffoni from BCM, I have learned that most of these companies are all embroiled in various lawsuits around the country, and it is preventing them from posting certain kinds of content. And the reason it's preventing them from posting certain kinds of content is they have legal insurance firms who are there to supply lawyers and funding when a lawsuit happens. T.REX Arms has that as well. And when a lawsuit happens, typically what happens is you are at the mercy of that legal law firm. If that law firm is insuring you for up to $2 million of litigation time and all of that, well, that law firm gets to call the shots. And the second you tell them, no, we're not going to settle, we want to fight this till the very end, that law firm can say, yeah, actually, we're not going to represent you anymore, and now you have to go find someone else. So a lot of these companies are having to operate basically at the, I don't want to say at the whims of the legal insurance company, but they are at the mercy of those companies. And a lot of those companies play it extremely safe. They don't want certain things said, they don't want certain photos shown. They're trying to win a lawsuit, they're trying to paint a certain picture, they're trying to defend their client in such a way, and they are just super duper duper safe. And I understand, I totally get it. But I want to take you guys back to a little bit of history. This was actually some stuff that I learned doing some research on this that probably most of you don't know. So back in 2005, there was a law that was passed, and it is called the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. And basically, this is like a 20-page document. Basically, what this document is outlining is various provisions for firearms companies to be able to import, sell, and export various firearms and not be held liable to lawsuits that could occur due to misuse of the products in the process. And for the most part, this particular bill, this particular law that we've had, has prevented lawsuits from occurring as shootings have ramped up for various reasons, and we can talk about that on another episode possibly, and there just haven't been very many lawsuits. When Sandy Hook happened, we had a lawsuit against Remington. A Remington Bushmaster rifle, I believe it was, or a Remington rifle, was used in the shooting, and so families got together with Everytown USA, I believe, and a few others, and they sued Remington for the use of the rifle, but they specifically targeted the marketing that Remington was doing at the time. That was a real big piece that they were hitting on, and they were focusing on some of the consumer side of it less than the federal sort of the arms side of it, and they were looking for various loopholes. What ended up happening with this lawsuit is Remington ultimately went out of business for lots of different reasons. There are some conspiracies out there that the Freedom Group, who ended up purchasing Remington, I believe it was during the lawsuit or it was right before, was actually sort of a coup to sink the company on purpose and then take a big player out of the game. It's an interesting theory. Costs a lot of money, so whoever is that driven to put a company out of business and buy a company for hundreds of millions of dollars, I'll say respect. Respect for going that far for your mission and losing all that money. Like, I got to give respect to whoever's doing that, if that is actually the objective. I don't think that's actually what happened. I think the firm that ended up purchasing them, the Freedom Group, was just trying to make as much profit as possible, as a lot of companies do. They didn't know how to run a firearms company and then ended up driving it into the ground. But what happened was, when Remington went out of business, the legal law firm, again, just like I talked about a second ago, still had this lawsuit that they were embroiled in with the individuals from Sandy Hook, and ultimately they settled for $73 million to everybody involved in the suit. And what this did, and this was a couple years ago, 2 or 3 years ago that this occurred in 2022, this opened the door for lawsuits galore. Any shooting that occurs, people are now looking to sue for a lot of the same things. And a lot of the verbiage that is used is marketing related. And it's actually interesting, because I've had some phone calls with some journalists in the past, and I remember getting on the phone expecting to talk to them about like just the normal rigmarole about firearms legislation and whatnot, but they were asking lots of questions about marketing, lots of questions about Call of Duty, lots of questions about 2009 Modern Warfare 2, what's going on with that, how that affected things, and then there was an article recently about the ACR, there being some sort of backroom deal with the ACR getting into Modern Warfare 2, Remington being very involved in that, and there was an article that was published, I want to say about 8 months ago on that. So there are some people who are looking to go down that road, and it's actually pretty interesting. Here's a segment that I want to read. This was an act, I want to say, this is in Washington, so essentially what's happening right now is we have various states who are trying to enact their own laws in their own states that allow citizens, after a shooting or after a lawless thing has occurred, to actually be able to sue the firearms manufacturer instead of just going off of the federal law preventing them from doing so. So there's some state law, challenging federal law and whatnot, which is interesting. But this one right here says that the governor, signed by the governor, this bill ensures that firearms manufacturers and sellers will face liability if they fail to establish and implement and enforce reasonable controls in the manufacture, sale, distribution, and marketing of firearms. Now, this is the crazy one. Who gets to decide what marketing a firearm looks like? Whether it is predatory on the youth, because that is typically the verbiage that you'll find in these lawsuits. For example, I published a video a few weeks ago shooting with a BCM with a GoPro rifle. I'm shooting really fast. I'm running and gunning. I'm not just doing bench rest shooting, like off of just a little table or whatever. The shooting looks cool, but the shooting's also not bad. I'm actually getting my hits. Could a lawyer look at that footage and go, hey, this footage is showing tactics and it's cool. It's filmed 24 frames a second. It's from the POV of the shooter, and we've had some shootings that were live streamed in a similar fashion. I believe the Christchurch shooting was like that. They put music behind it. It's a cool video, and thus we can rule that it is being marketed towards young people, because surely boomers don't like 24 frames a second color-graded footage with music. Only young people like it, even though young people at age 18 to 21 can actually purchase rifles, and most of our demographic happens to be aged 18 and up and not necessarily younger people. So there is an interesting situation going on right now where marketing is being focused on in some way of holding firearms companies responsible based on the actual content that they produce. California, around the same time, passed their own bill, once again, so Washington State kind of did their thing, California did theirs, doing the exact same thing. Hey, if we have individuals in our state who end up getting killed in a shooting of some sort, well, they can also sue firearms manufacturers and hold them accountable to the heinous crime of offering a firearm. And one thing that I noticed when I was looking at a number of these lawsuits is they typically always include the store that sold the firearm in the first place. And this is what I find is interesting. Generally speaking, in most cases, when a gun store sells a firearm to a person, they are going to adhere to all of the standards and the guidelines that the ATF outlines for a 4473 and a background check. If a company does not do that, that is a great way of getting your FFL taken away from you and probably getting put out of business. So the prosecution is going to have to properly explain that in the process of that troubled person, that mentally unwell person, if they're going to say that, going to a gun store to purchase a firearm, somehow the gun store didn't background check them, didn't follow proper procedure, and there's a lot of procedure put on firearms shops to follow the rules that have been set on us by the ATF and by the government. It's just going to be a very interesting case for prosecution to make, and for the defense, obviously, is going to fight as well, because a lot of people out there, and a lot of these news articles that I was reading, they make it sound like the firearms industry is just completely unregulated, when we can't actually mail guns door to door. You have to go to a gun store. You have to actually do a background check. You then sit there for 15, 20 minutes, background check comes back. If it's an NFA item, you're even doing fingerprints. I mean, there's a lot of rigmarole you have to do to actually buy a gun in our country, in my opinion. And a lot of people just don't understand that, and they're not talking about that. But here's what was interesting. Right after Governor Newsom signed this bill into law, NSSF, and I will say big props to NSSF. They are, I believe, an arm of the NRA. I'm not a huge fan of the NRA. Most of you guys probably aren't either. But NSSF does focus on cases regarding commerce. They focus on how firearms are being sold, how they can be obtained, how they can be imported, especially. They do a lot of work in that area. And so they actually went in to sue, if I'm understanding this correctly, this bill that went through saying, hey, you can't actually put forward a state bill that can hold firearms companies liable. We have all this, federal law already, the 2005 bill saying that you can't do that. So, what the heck is going on? You can't actually do that. And then recently, that actually, wrong slide, that actually got blocked by a federal judge, I believe, in San Francisco. So, for the most part, it sounds like the California situation has stalled out, as far as individuals being able to sue firearms companies. But I do believe we're going to see a lot more of that. There's a lawsuit, I think, in New York as well. And there's just a lot of different things going on. And there's a particularly interesting lawsuit that just sprung up in particular, and that is the city of Chicago, I want to say a district attorney up there or something, is suing Glock for making handguns that are too easy to full auto. They've recovered something like 1,100 switches, I think, across the country. I don't think it's just in that state. And so they're saying, and they're alleging, that Glocks are too easy to modify, and thus they must be modified. So that's an interesting lawsuit that just got kicked off earlier this year. Glock is, they're going to fight it. They kind of have to fight it because retooling all their guns, I'm not going to say it would put their company out of business, but it could potentially put their company out of business. But this is what I find interesting about lawsuits like this. They're so blatantly inconsistent because you can actually modify other handguns to be full auto as well. And if full auto is such a bad thing, like if a piece of legislation like this is going to be consistent, then you just need to go ban all firearms that can be modified to be full auto. Because you can modify virtually any handgun or any firearm to be full auto, virtually, like pretty much. It is true that Glocks might be a little bit easier than some other firearms, but if the goal is full auto is evil, full auto is vile, we need to get it off the streets, it's really bad, then the fully consistent legislation you would actually push is an outright gun ban. Because pretty much every firearm out there can be made full auto. So it's a bit of a witch hunt going after Glock. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, I don't see that lawsuit going anywhere personally. I also, as a subject matter expert, I'm going to put a medal on myself. As a subject matter expert of shooting Glocks with switches, we have a switch in the armory, and I have shot quite a few rounds of auto through a Glock, and I'm going to tell you right now, it is the hardest machine gun. Yeah, it is the hardest machine gun. I was just thinking a mini Uzi might be harder. A full auto Glock is the hardest machine gun to shoot controllably. I can guarantee that criminals with full auto switches in their Glocks are less effective than if they were shooting their Glocks in semi-auto. So I would rather not go be an expert witness on switches on Glocks, but you know what? If Glock approached me and said, can you come out here and talk about this, I'd be willing to do that because I've been using Glocks for a long time. I love that they make a great handgun, and if I could give back to Glock in some way, I probably would. But I don't see that lawsuit going anywhere, and that is probably a good thing. So the most fascinating thing, I actually have a story. I have a story I want to tell, and this could take a second. The main thing that we're seeing right now with all these gun bills that are focused on the marketing that these firearms companies are doing, and these firearms companies somehow not, getting firearms in the hands of young people while somehow, still adhering to government law with background checks, which they have said in a number of these lawsuits that the individual that ended up shooting up the school or the location, that they're talking about, passed a background check. They passed a federal background check. So it's like they went through the entire process that you guys made, and so how are you going to blame us? But the thing that I think is interesting is the terminology and the strategy that is currently being used to ban firearms, to ban assault rifles, to ban semi-automatic weapons, I believe is kind of over. Now, I'm not going to say it's over completely because it is going to rear its ugly head in certain states, but at a federal level, I believe the entire assault weapons ban, firearms bans are pretty much over. The new strategy, it appears, is to go after companies economically. It's to make selling firearms much more harder. It's to make the liability a nightmare. Insurance companies won't touch a firearms company with a 10-foot pole if a number of these lawsuits effectively go through, forcing gun companies to pay up in millions of dollars. And I want you to imagine a world for a second, because this is absolutely what would happen. If these lawsuits that are ongoing, there's like a half a dozen or so of them right now, end up going through, they're going to set precedent. And people are going to see that, just like the Remington with the Sandy Hook lawsuit, and they're going to go, hey, there's money to be made. There's a case to be made that gun companies can be held responsible for how the product is used to harm other people. I'm going to sue because X, Y thing happened. And what you're going to have is firearms companies who can't get legal insurance. They're going to realize they have to self-insure. They're going to have to set money aside every year or every month, every quarter to insure themselves when a lawsuit inevitably happens. And what you're going to see is firearms prices are probably going to triple. So your standard DDM4 V7 that is currently $1,800 is going to be like $4 grand, $3 grand. That is the only way for this all to work if lawsuits can be done just at the drop of a hat at any time, and insurance companies aren't going to be backing up firearms companies. And that is the strategy that is currently being used. And what's interesting is when you go and you start reading websites like, I think it's the Gifford, if I'm saying that right, the Gifford website, they're a big legal firm that's anti-gun, or a big sort of a news firm that focuses on that. And Everytown USA, they actually describe their strategy very plainly on their websites. And I went to most of those websites for my information. I'm not going to go to a pro-gun site that has a bias. I mean, I'll go to both. But I actually learned more going to the anti-gun websites and learning about their strategy, and them referencing Sandy Hook and saying, hey, the precedent has been set. We can now sue gun companies. We can hold them to a higher standard so that they can implement various controls to protect our youth and blah, blah, blah. And the interesting thing, this is the interesting thing too. A lot of people will read that, and the verbiage is, it's very clever. It's kind of like common sense gun laws, because you say that, and the average normie on the street is going to agree, yeah, we need common sense gun laws. And some of the verbiage that's being used is new, and it's very clever. But I want to tell a story that kind of illustrates where these people are going with legislation like this and what their sort of grand design and plan is. Because you'll see people say, well, we don't want to ban all guns. We just want to make gun ownership safer and make it so that companies can be sued at any time. So when we stood up our range, this is a fun story. When we stood up our range, back, it was like 5 years ago, the range you all see in our content, it's like 15 minutes from our building. I started shooting there every week, 2 or 3 days every week. And the closest neighbor, there were a couple neighbors, but we're out in the middle of nowhere in Tennessee. It wasn't a problem. Nobody said a word. And we're shooting, we're doing our thing. And then we had a little strategy to see if we could get our range zoned commercially so that we could offer classes full-time potentially, so that we could maybe place our building there. So we started to go through the process of getting our plot of land zoned commercially. It would have been spot zoning because it was, I believe, agricultural, and I believe it still is. And so the second we proposed the idea of zoning it commercially, a little sign went up saying, hey, on this date, there's going to be a vote with the planning zoning committee. It was a zoning committee. And so we thought, cool, like the county, they kind of know who we are. I think this is going to be fine. We step into the room, and there are 20 extra people who are essentially railing about our range being unsafe and being something that's going to leak lead into the county and all sorts of other arguments. And they effectively bullied the group of the zoning committee, not even voting on our property being commercially zoned. And I didn't end up going to that meeting, but my brother came back and he was just like, man, it was pretty wild. Like 20 people showed up and they totally, made us so that we can't get our zoning. And I was like, well, that's weird. We live out in Tennessee. We're out in the middle of nowhere. We're in the patron state of shooting stuff. Like, surely we can have a gun range. Like, what the heck? So one of our neighbors reaches out to us, or we reach out to them. I think we actually went and reached out to them. And they said, hey, let's have a meeting and let's talk about this. So we went, sure, we'll go, one-on-one. We'll have a little conversation. So it was me and a couple people from T.REX, and I think it was like 4 or 5 other people. And we started talking about some sort of compromise, because I don't want to piss off the neighbors all the time. I want to figure out something. We offered to sell the land to them if they could help us find another property to move to. That's a nice little solution. And then they said, towards the end of the conversation, because we weren't making headway, they said, hey, we would love it if you could just give us a sign of good faith, a good faith gesture so that we can move on and not have any problems. And I was like, sure, what is it? And up until this point, I offered to not shoot at night. I offered to contact them ahead of time and let them know when we're shooting at night, to only shoot suppressed at night. I was doing all kinds of things that legally I did not have to do. We don't have a noise ordinance in the county. I can blow up tannerite at 1 a.m. and it is my right to do so on my land. But I was trying to, make them happy and do something, because would I want someone setting up a range right next door to my house? I shoot guns a lot. I actually probably wouldn't. But the thing they said at the end was, the sign of good faith is, just don't shoot anymore. And I'm sitting there like, well, what have we been talking about this whole time? We need a gun range. Like you know that we have a company that you've said that you like the idea of. You said you're pro 2A, but their sort of idea for a nice course of action would just be no shooting at all. And when I was reading all of these, lawsuits that are ongoing, I thought back to that story and I went, this is exactly what these people are trying to do. They're trying to make it so, hey, we don't want you guys to not own guns. We just want you to never shoot them or use them, and definitely not to own guns, actually. That is actually what's going on here. And it gave me some flashbacks to that incident like 5 years ago. And I just walked out of that meeting like, there's nothing we can do with our neighbors. They just want us to not shoot at all. And that is obviously not an option. More stuff transpired from there, but that is a story for another day. Now, like I mentioned in the first episode of this show, one thing that I really like about this format is it is live and we can take questions. And I believe that our producer upstairs, I'm seeing lots of questions populate in here. We are going to cover some questions after discussing whatever topics are timely to the discussion. And next week we will have a guest. I'll explain some of that later. But before we actually get into the actual questions themselves, we need to talk about this episode's sponsor, T.REX ARMS. That's right, we're sponsoring ourselves. Insert the meme of the guy giving himself a medal. So one thing that is a huge advantage to T.REX ARMS over some channels and platforms out there is we are not relying on monetization through YouTube to do what we do. And it has been evident through a few interactions I've had with other companies that they take monetization very seriously, to the point of self-censoring themselves, which I have a pretty big problem with. Like, I don't want to do that myself. If they want to do that, that's on them. I went on a podcast a while back, and right before the podcast, I'm sitting there, we're getting ready, there's all these people, and he turns to me and goes, we have 2 rules on the show. We don't talk about the election being stolen, and we don't talk about 9/11. I think it was 9/11. And I just sat there for a second, and I was like, okay, it's your show, your rules, that's fine. And then I remember asking someone or the actual host why, and they said monetization. They'll be demonetized the second they actually talk about one of those subjects. And I'm sitting there going, okay, so you're self-censoring yourself for the sake of money. Like, I do kind of understand it. But the nice thing about T.REX ARMS is we aren't held hostage by monetization. We've never been monetized on YouTube, and we're still not monetized on YouTube. We can talk about whatever the heck we want until YouTube pulls this show and takes it down, which is probably very likely during the election. We probably won't be able to stream and do an election stream as much as I would like to do it. But one of the ways that we're able to run a show like this, which is expensive, which takes time, which we have lots of people that are here right now, is by selling product and you guys supporting it on our website. So the strategy is very simple. If you appreciate the content that we are producing, the shooting stuff, the product videos on every page, the various education, getting into some of this going on in our country, and you're down for that and you want to see it continuing to happen because you want to see it more in the firearms industry and you like what we're doing, then consider supporting us at T.REX-arms.com. You could buy a hat, you could buy a shirt, you could buy a product, but the really great thing is we win when you purchase products from us. We can continue making all of this content, and you win because you get kitted. It's a win-win for everyone. I mean, you're going to have to pay some money, but it's a win-win for everyone, and that's what I really like. So I do have a product that I want to show you guys, our most requested product of, I'm going to say, the last 2 or 3 years, and this one is going to surprise you. A paste gun. This is essentially a modified target paster or price gun that has this little cardboard colored little paster. So you walk up to a target, you load one, you hit the little trigger thing, and then you paste it on the target and you move along. And I see comments on basically every single video from people when I show one of these going, what is that and where do I buy one? And historically, the Ben Stoeger Pro Shop is a great place to buy them. But we decided we wanted to bring them on as well. So now there are 2 or 3 places online you can buy paster guns. They are like $80 or something. They're not a super cheap training instrument, but if you are someone who's doing a lot of reps on the range, you're doing a lot of live fire, being able to patch holes and continue without having to set up new targets all the time. Or what I used to do is I would take a Sharpie, and this is kind of helpful sometimes. You write a 1 next to your first string of fire, and then a 2 next to each hole, and then a 3. And so you can kind of like watch your pattern as you go. That is actually very helpful for training, but the downside to that is you can see where you just shot, the target starts to look really busy, and it gets busy real quick if you're shooting more than like 20 rounds. So the paste gun allows you to use the same target over and over. Just paste up super fast. It's super efficient. So if you're someone who's shooting paper a lot, which I highly recommend, steel is dessert. Paper's actually like the broccoli. It's the productive stuff. Consider getting a paste gun. It is not something you have to have. If you want to just buy the roll of pasters and do it by hand, you can absolutely do that as well. Now, before we get into the questions, though, we got to talk about gun stuff, right? We talked about legislation. We talked about ideology. But today, a new product showed up in the armory that we will be, geez, this is the wrong program, but that's all right. We just got a MCX Surge. SURG, which stands for Suppressed Upper Receiver Group. This is a product that SIG is offering to the public, which I think is cool. It's very based. It's one of these military contract products that is going to the military. I believe Navy Special Warfare picked this gun up. We just got ours into the armory. I ordered it like, I want to say it was like 8 months ago. So this product just came in, and essentially what this is a upper with a suppressor that's built in. Well, you can remove it, put it back on. The suppressor has this nice little cage that helps protect your hand from heat and whatnot. A skinnier rail if you want to run a skinny rail, a folding stock, and then a stock adapter so that you can run a folding stock on a standard AR-15 lower, or in the military's case, a M4A1 lower. Here's a close-up of the actual hexagonal, I mean, some of you guys might think it's really cool, some of you guys might think it's really ugly, suppressor protector. One thing I am hearing is that the suppressor protector is metal, so as you are firing a lot of rounds through the suppressor, it heats up the entire cover and kind of negates the purpose. You get this new little shovel nose rail, which I actually really like. I kind of want one for my other MCXs so that the piston's easier to adjust, and it just looks cool as well. And then the interesting thing with this that I found was fun was there's actually an integrated heat shield into the fat rail. So the idea is as you are shooting and your hand's out there where your laser is, you're not going to run into as much heat issues. So what we're going to do with this upper, talked to Brandon about it right before I drove out to here, was we're going to use this in an armory video. We're going to put this gun, we're going to put this upper on a M4A1 lower, and we're actually going to shoot it as the military would intend in select fire, in semi-auto. We're going to test it, shoot it, mess with it, post up a video on the Armory channel probably in a few weeks. Just for a little bit more education on what kind of weapons the military is going to. Civilians can absolutely build something like this or buy this one, which is very cool, but they can also build something that is better, I believe. I don't know if this thing's going to be that great. But now, let's talk about questions. Let's get into some Q&A, which is super fun. So, Stephen asked this great question early on. I believe it was in the pre-show. The pre-show is when the show is live and there's people in the chat and they're asking questions, and I get in there and talk to them a little bit. And he says, how do you choose what new product gets a green light for production? Now, this is an actually great question because today, or I would say yesterday, we actually had a lengthy conversation with the holster development team trying to figure out where some of the product inception decision, where that goes in the process, and when we need to bring that up to other teams, how we facilitate collaboration and make good decisions on products. The answer to this was when the company was much smaller. Right now we're around 89 people, something like that. When the company was smaller and we just had insight into the entire company, like I was involved with every department, like I knew what was going on, and I was bringing most products forward for either production, design, or a retail product, bringing it in. It was very easy because I just made the decision. I just shot stuff, I looked at it, I thought it was cool, I figured this is something people need. Hey, we should sell it. Everyone said yes, and we were good to go. As the company has scaled and we have different departments with different responsibilities, I'm not in every meeting anymore. Some people aren't in other people's meetings. This is a question that we are actually still hashing out to make the best process possible. But for the most part, what we have is a particular group of people. It's called PCWG. That's the meeting name. It's Product Curation Working Group. PCW, yeah, that's right. And basically the job of this team is to look at incoming products, look at incoming items, whatever it happens to be. Think about you guys, the customer. Think about the financial implications of bringing a product in. And then we go, yes, this meets the mission of T.REX Arms. It meets the brand. It meets what customers want. And it meets the financial goals of being a certain margin, not costing too much money, so that we're not going to lose money and ultimately have to go out of business. Because that wouldn't serve anyone if that happened. So right now we have a group that does that. We red light products. We green light products. Some products we say not this year. We have maxed out what products we're bringing in this year. It's something like a max of 60, just to give you all full transparency. And we are having to prioritize between lots of different products, which ones we bring in. And it's typically products that are associated with different suites. So the long range suite we brought in, we have a couple more products to go there. We have a lot of new nylon stuff that's inbound for this year, and we've launched a lot of product. And then we will begin the process next year, which will include things like thermal devices and some other items, but I'm not going to get into those too much. But I will say it is still a process that we are developing and that we are improving so that we can make better decisions faster, which ultimately serves you guys, and that's what we want. The next question, I believe I answered this similarly last time, but it's a good question, and I'm sure we'll get it every week. Matt asks, where do you want to see the citizen defense industry go in the future, i.e. product/tech opportunities that are currently limited by price to government and military? So I have an example right here that I think is great, and that is laser rangefinders. If some of you all watched my long range, it's like an hour and 18 minutes, something like that, that we dropped on Saturday. It's just an info-dense video on my journey getting into long range and talking through different products. It's a pretty boring video, just full disclaimer, but you can watch it sped up 2 times and get all the information. But one of the things that I pinpointed in the video was Vortex made this really awesome little laser rangefinder device. I mean, it's kind of big actually, with a built-in ballistic computer, and they sell it for something like $2,000. You can find them out there for $1,600, $1,800, and when that device came out, the first thing I thought was, oh crap, it's Vortex, it might suck. But the other part of me went, hey, this is really cool. They're making a device that is normally $10,000, available mostly only to the military, that now the consumer market and the PRS guys and the long range guys and the gas gun guys, shooting matches, can actually go out and buy. It costs as much as some of the high-end scopes, if not cheaper. And I think we're going to see more products going in that direction where certain features are removed that frankly civilians don't need as much due to certain capabilities that we don't have access to, and then they are presented at a cheaper price. So huge props to Vortex for producing a product and showing the way. I really think this product is going to show the way for other manufacturers to make a laser rangefinder that is in the $2,000 to $3,000 range, that is starting to be much more attainable and affordable to civilians, and I think we're going to see a lot of that. We're already seeing, and Isaac talks about it on T.REX Labs, all of the ATAC technology that is available to civilians, different mesh networks. You can all wear a little device. It's magic to me. I'm not the guy to ask. That's why he talks about tech and stuff. But you wear all these little devices. You create a mesh network. You could see where all of you are on a map, just like in a video game, and then you can navigate and do things. And historically, that was only available to the military. But now there are lots of guys, smaller companies, who are creating products that are similar to what the military has that can bring similar capabilities to civilians. Avon selling gas masks to civilians, I think starting last year. That was a big one. Avon was a company that we were interested in selling gas masks from, I want to say it was like 3 years ago, and we couldn't really talk to anyone. We had a contact from, I want to say Team Wendy, because they got purchased by Team Wendy, and we just couldn't get gas masks. They were not interested in selling to the public. And now you can go to a website and buy the same gas masks that they're issuing to the military, they're issuing to special operations, they're issuing all over the world, and regular folks can show up and buy them. Yes, they're expensive, but they're also like probably the best gas mask on the market. So we're seeing things change here and there. Certain capabilities, certain products are becoming more available. As far as improvements to those products go, that is going to take time. I talked about it in the last episode, but with suppressors having like a 1-week turnaround wait time, we're going to see suppressor tech explode in the next probably 3 or 4 years because consumers can start giving regular feedback, and the military does not necessarily do that. That does generally come from the commercial side, and that responsibility falls on us. When you get a suppressor that is doing well or doing badly, rather than getting some sort of buyer's confirmation bias that you think it's the greatest thing ever because you spent $1,000 on it, consider it your duty in some ways to write to the company and say, hey, this piece on the suppressor really sucks. It's doing these things for me. I would love to see you improve it. It's possible you won't buy the improved version of the can because you can't afford it, but you have now given them valuable information that they can use to update the suppressor for other customers out there. And I would love to see the community, I say that loosely, seeing feedback to companies actually being a service that all of us can be providing to firearms companies so that they can make superior products for future generations or when we go and buy a new product. Next question from Crazy Luca. Ready Rig V2 anytime soon? So it's actually kind of funny. The V2 is already made. Well, not quite. The original Ready Rig was actually much more complicated of a product. I actually show it in the Hilo hog hunt video I did with Garand Thumb like 5 years ago. Basically, the way it works is you can clip a placard into it. So I had all my 5.56 mags. I had that tied into the side, full elastic cummerbund. I mean, it was a pretty slick little thing. And I had a Molly ATAC adapter, section of Molly up at the top of the rig that most people weren't doing on chest rigs at the time. And I thought it'd be cool to have that. Ultimately, that version of the Ready Rig was going to be too expensive to bring that to market, and it was also a little bit too complicated for our SO cell that we had in-house, so we opted for a more budget-friendly, simple version of the Ready Rig for the first version. We are going to be updating the Ready Rig in the future. It is probably going to possess some of the same capabilities as the original prototype as I intended it, but we will see what happens. I think it's on the roadmap for next year, or it's at least on the roadmap to develop, test, design, send to end users, get feedback, because it is a weird product. It's a very cool product, but it is a very interesting one, and I do want to update it. Next question from Desert Sky, spelled wrong with a Z, but that's okay. What is the T.REX ARMS customer services mission/model, if any? Now, that is a great question because I can't name you off the top of my head a specific slogan that customer service has. But I can tell you sort of the principle that is driving our business and that is driving customer service. And that is we are trying to treat others the way that we want to be treated. And we're trying to love our neighbors as we would want to be loved as well, or more than ourselves. That is the guiding principle of customer service in the company at a high level, a strategic level. And Kyle, who I will have on this show, actually, that's a great idea. I'll have Kyle on. I just thought of it. That's great. Thank you. I will bring him on, and I will actually talk to him about that because he was the one who really pioneered the customer service model and brought it into a much more, let's say, advanced age than what I was doing. I wanted a customer service model. The way I saw it was, I don't want to be a faceless company. I don't want to have vanilla responses, and I'll talk to people at any time. I remember I was sending people messages on Christmas back in 2014, and I had one person write back and go, hey bro, it's Christmas, go spend time with the family, like scolding me. And he was right. I probably should not have been doing that. But that's how I saw customer service when I was starting out. Like, I will write back to people when I get into bed. I'm on my phone. I'm getting back to people as fast as possible. I didn't necessarily have a specific strategy for doing it. I just felt like it was the right thing to do. It's how I would want to be treated when I write to a company asking a question. I want to get an answer back stat, and I don't just want to, we don't offer that at this time, but something a little bit more meaningful than that. When Kyle came on board and took over customer service, he implemented processes, he implemented actual standards, and he actually built that out a little bit more in depth than what I was just doing on Instagram and in email myself. So I would love to have Kyle on here and interview him. He's done a ton of research on other companies, Ritz-Carlton, other folks out there. One of the best customer service experiences that I've actually had, and I kind of want to take the CS team there, is the Games Workshop store in Franklin. I've been there to buy a few products, and the guy running that store does an excellent job circulating through, asking questions, and this is the kind of thing I absolutely love. I had a bunch of brushes because I have a Acadian army that eventually I'll finish. I had a bunch of brushes. I took them to the desk, and he kind of asked me some questions about what I was doing. He said, do you know what you're doing? I was like, no, I don't. Like, I painted stuff like 15 years ago. I'm just getting into it. And he took, I had 8 brushes. He took 4 and just said, don't buy these. They're not what you want. And he put them back. That's the kind of customer service we're trying to do at T.REX Arms. That's the kind of customer service that brings people back to the store. And I've been back to that store because I appreciated that instead of going online and buying from Amazon and saving money. I'll go support that dude who runs that store. It's probably a franchise because he took product away from me that he said wasn't going to serve me and gave me like 1 other brush instead, or just told me to buy those 4. And I appreciate that form of customer service. So we'll bring Kyle on and we'll ask him that question. Customer service is huge for us. So this individual, great username, says, as prepared citizens, how do you recommend finding like-minded people, especially with the increasingly invasive information age and the fear of being honeypotted? So we got an interesting email because I do want to tell you that this is a thing and it is happening. Somebody posted, this is sort of a strategy. I like the idea of it. I like the principle behind it. It is a good way of farming engagement, but it is a good way to meet people as well. They posted on Instagram, hey, post your city/state, no other information, city and state, so you can find people in the same area. And what you expect is everyone following your page believes a lot of the same things. They're into guns, they're into two-way stuff, they're into training. Depending on how small and curated your page is, you may actually have really like-minded people if you're really outspoken about what you believe. And in the process, you may have 3 people you DM and go, hey, I see that you're in Franklin, Tennessee. I see you're in Centerville. Let's hang out. Let's go, get a beer, and then let's go to the range immediately. And we actually got an email after one of these posts, and this post specifically was referenced from this individual, of a guy saying, hey, I met up with some dudes in my area that I met on that post, and they wanted to bring me into their group. We ended up getting on a Discord call. They practically interrogated me for 2 hours, and then they gave me all these NDAs to sign, and some of the purpose of the group was very hush-hush. But this guy sent us the email and said, hey, just so you know, there's feds absolutely watching so-and-so's Instagram page, and they're trying to get me to sign stuff and do things. So if in the process of you going out with people and talking to them and they start interrogating you, giving you NDAs to sign, just being really hush-hush about things, probably a fed. You probably don't want to do anything with them. But the advice that I would give is find a church. Go to church. It's a great way to meet like-minded people, kind of regardless of, I don't want to say regardless of what you believe, but I've met a lot of great people going to the church that we are going to, especially my Sunday school group, lots of other young married folk. I've taken them to the range. We've hung out a little bit. We don't all agree on the same stuff. I believe one individual is somewhat anti-gun, and so we just, talk cordially. And then other people are very pro-gun. I've taken them to the range. We've hung out. That is one way that you can meet people, but it is very difficult to find like-minded people. But the number one thing that I will say is don't go straight into talking about, let's say, the big topics. Don't go straight into maybe even training at the range. Go out to coffee first. Go out and drink a beer. Watch a football game. Do something fairly neutral, especially if it's a rando from the internet. Don't just immediately go to the range. The chances of getting Chris Kyled are somewhat high doing that with randoms on the internet, and you should get to know them first as a human being before you go and put yourself in a situation like that. But the question is great. I could actually flip the question around to you guys. In my case, I've met like-minded people by being an employer. People submitting resumes, they come in for interviews, we talk, we bring them on board, and then we've got this core group of people. They're here, a bunch of them are here today running this show, and I get to hang out with those people. So I'm a little privileged in that regard where I'm able to hire people, and we're able to hire people that we like. But if you're someone who is looking for like-minded people, that is a huge challenge. And I can ask you all the exact same question. And I know I joked about it on John Lovell's show about not having friends, but whatever. Next question. This guy asks, Lucas, I think I remember you talking about being somewhat involved with the PSA M110 clones. What do you think of the new A2 version that came out today? Do you know much? So my understanding with this new rifle that PSA launched, and Cameron told me, hey, we got a new gun coming out. We're putting a better barrel in it. It's sub-MOA. He kind of said that jokingly because the gun I had, I would say, was not sub-MOA. It was 1.6, which is not too bad, 1.7, something like that. They're putting a Faxon barrel, I believe, in that gun, so it's a little bit nicer than the other barrel that they had, I believe. It does seem to be an improved gun. I think it's a little bit more expensive. It's got an M-LOK rail. Outside of that, I don't really know much. I have not shot one. I I would actually like to get one. I'd like to be able to shoot one. I don't have a whole lot of time because I have all these other guns that are lined up that I'm supposed to be using. But that is something, that is a gun that is on the market that's probably decent as far as accuracy goes compared to the M110 clone. I like the M110 clone for the vibe. I'll be honest, I really do. I like the rail, the quad rail that you just absolutely beat up, and I just really enjoy the rifle and I enjoyed shooting it. So don't know much about that gun though. Miles says, do you think video games can transfer to real life shooting skills and tactics? So this is my opinion. My opinion is kind of, sort of, they can. What I have found in having conversations with students at the range specifically is when I can use a video game to reference a concept like ADSing. You right-click the mouse, you hit the bumper on your controller, you aim down the sights really quickly in the same spot every time. When I can reference what that looks like, what they've seen in a video game, and what they need to see doing it in real life on a target, students get it instantly who have played a modern first-person shooter video game. Other people who are a little older aren't going to understand that analogy, and they're not going to get it as well. So I've definitely used video game analogies to explain certain concepts that shooters, like younger shooters who play video games, understand instantly. I also believe if you took, and this is a video I'd love to create, and I've had on the back burner for years, if you took a bunch of players from, say, Ready or Not, or I would actually use a Rainbow Six Siege team, and you took them to a CQB class with a good instructor talking to them about the principles of CQB, I believe those individuals would get it sooner from having seen it in person thousands of times and kind of what it looks like. Some stuff doesn't carry over, obviously, but they would understand what's going on fundamentally with CQB better than absolute randoms who've never done or seen anything like it. I do believe that. I've seen it with my students on the flat range. I believe it could happen with CQB. I bet if you could take squad players who are super serious about the milsim of squad and radio comms with other players and stuff, and then you took them to a milsim event, they would understand radio communications with other people because they're just replicating in real life what they did in the video game. So yes, I do believe some things can carry over. You can understand certain analogies better and kind of see it. But as far as teaching straight up tactics, I don't really think so. Tactics in video games don't always work, like jumping around a corner and blasting someone. Doesn't really work in real life. I have practiced jump shots. I can tell you from experience they don't really work. I haven't done them in force on force, but also pretty sure those won't work. But even just from a shooting standpoint, being able to land hits on a target is just not going to happen with an actual jump shot. So those are the questions that we have for today. I love hitting them. They're all over the place. They could be about video games like this one. They can be about certain firearms accessories, or they can be specific industry-related questions. And I know we haven't gotten into specific industry drama quite yet, and we are going to get into that in the future when there are events that occur that are timely, that need to be talked about, calling out poor behaviors, and we will be doing that in the future to build a stronger firearms community. Now, next week, we're going to have a fun episode. We are going to bring in Brandon, who you all have seen on the Armory channel. You've seen on the T.REX ARMS channel as well. He's going to be here. I'm going to be talking to him a little bit about the tactical games, what he's been learning, attending some events. He just got back from another one, I believe it was last week, where he was competing, and he's got another one coming up. I've got my sniper match coming up here in like 2 weeks. So we're going to be talking to Brandon about some of that, and I want to be asking him some questions about how his training in MARSOC, how it differed from his training as a civilian today. We've already had some great conversations about that at work, but believe it or not, I'm going to learn things talking to him on this show. When we're at work, we're super busy. We're running around and we're doing stuff. And so I'll learn things being able to sit down here and just for an hour having a nice little conversation with Brandon. You'll get to learn a little bit more about him, some of his background, why he does what he does, and we'll get to learn together about his experiences in the tactical game. So I'm looking forward to next week, and with all that said, I will see you then.